and thank you for joining me for another astrology oracle reading. It is August 29th, and we are reading a chart for 11:11 a.m. set for Dayton, Ohio, as always. And this gives us a Virgo sun, a Libra moon, and a Libra rising. Now, there is some activity happening in Libra that I'd like to mention. So there is a conjunction forming between the moon and Mercury, which will be exact today. As soon as the moon moves into the 3rd degree, it's currently at 2 degrees. So really just within maybe an hour or two, we're going to see that exact conjunction between the moon and Mercury in Libra. Absolutely beautiful conjunction to be happening there, especially with regards to very Libran themes, right? So aesthetics, beauty, social justice, fairness, balance. This is just a really beautiful, harmonious energy. And when we have a conjunction between planets, we have the beginning of something, right? We have a new sort of phase, if you will, occurring. Because conjunctions, much like new moons, happen when two planets or a transiting planet and a natal planet form into an exact alignment. So as I mentioned, the moon is at 2 degrees and Mercury is at 3 degrees. So today we will be seeing that exact conjunction taking place. And these conjunct planets are opposing Jupiter in Aries. So Jupiter is at 7 degrees. So we're not going to see Mercury form that exact conjunction. Mercury will not be at 7 degrees today, but the moon will. The moon is a very quick moving planet. Yes, I know the moon is not a planet, but in astrological terms, it very much is. So, you know, again, very, very interesting energy that we have here. Jupiter is in Aries right now. It's very much wanting to, you know, sort of like lead the way, right? Like burn the fire so we can see where we're going. Sagittarius rules over Jupiter. So anytime I think about Jupiter, I really just picture like an arrow being shot and just really traveling into the distance. Now, Sagittarius is a fire sign, much like Aries is. So that arrow that I picture in my mind always is lit on fire. And by the time it lands, it's sort of trailblazed a path to follow. So that kind of is always what I associate with Jupiter. And that energy is right now very opposite to the lunar energy and to the mercurial energy that's going on. So we have Aries and we have Libra kind of, you know, on each end of the spectrum, you know, staring down the barrel with some very spiritual planets. Jupiter, the moon, and Mercury are all considered very spiritual planets, especially personal practices. So, you know, if you are feeling the need to rejoice, meditate, you know, experience some gratitude this week, I'd say that's really perfect alignment with this energy. But of course, that is not all that is going on. We are also seeing trines from the moon to Pluto, and that is really just because the moon was just in Virgo. Pluto, of course, is in Capricorn. So you see a trine when you have the same like elemental energy. So Virgo and Capricorn, they are both earth signs. So that is why the moon was sort of forming this really lovely trine to Pluto, is based on that elemental energy. But of course, the moon has since moved into Libra, where that trine is going to break off here in just a few hours. We are also seeing a trine between the moon in Libra and Mars in Gemini. So yes, Mars has officially ingressed into Gemini as of last week. If you are involved in the astrological community in any way, then you've definitely heard some talk about Mars in Gemini. Because of a retrograde happening later this year, Mars will be in Gemini until March of 2023. Now, that is a very long time for Mars to be in any single sign, simply because it is relatively a fast-moving planet. But, you know, with retrograde behavior, we do have to kind of take a step back and then resume that motion forward, which is really just going to keep us locked into, you know, Mars and Gemini for a very long time. So if you have a natal Libra moon, if you have a natal Aquarius moon, then this actually may be really benefic for you, simply because there will be a trine between Mars and the moon, you know, in those elements. Of course, if you have other planets as well, like let's say that you have a Mercury in Libra or Saturn in Aquarius, we are going to again see trines happening to that Mars, because that trine again is between that elemental energy. So with with Mars being in Gemini, Any air sign placement that you have, including Gemini, is going to be activated by this Mars transit. Now, I'm not going to get too much into Mars because I have covered a video on Mars in the past, and if you're interested, you can click the link in my show notes to see the rest of my videos and catch up on that. But again, good things to keep in mind, because this is a really long-term transit that we're seeing with Mars, which we don't typically do. A couple other things that we're seeing happening here, an opposition between the Venus, Leo, and Saturn in Aquarius. This has actually just been exact. So Venus is at 21 degrees, Saturn is at 20 degrees. Saturn is retrograde. That is besides my point here. Just important to note. But yeah, Venus is in opposition to Saturn, and it has been for at least a few days now. This is not a very comfortable transit. It definitely makes us very aware of the things that we lack, whether that's within our relationships or material life, or, even being aware of like creative blockages. I'm a writer, so if you can relate, just having like writer's block and kind of, sort of like the depressive sense that can kind of come around that. But, Venus in Leo is very bold and expressive. So if you're feeling kind of stuck in a rut with your creative pursuits right now, then it's a good time to maybe just diversify whatever forms of media you're consuming, right? If you're spending far too much time on social media, which in my opinion is a killer for creatives, then maybe it's a good time to indulge in some foreign films, or, maybe read a comic book. Just do something kind of out of the ordinary, but still very much in the arts. Leo loves that. All right, let's see. Anything else that's really worth mentioning? I mean, again, there's a lot. There's always a lot going on astrologically. We are living in some very intense times, my friends. I would just be aware that in the next few days, we're also going to see the moon in Libra forming an opposition to Chiron in Aries, and that could be a bit of an emotional time. But, all around, these energies present themselves to be, useful and to help us grow and evolve. So who wants to stay stagnant? All right. So we just recently also had a new moon in Virgo over the weekend. So how was that? For me, it definitely... The communication associated with Virgo became very apparent for me with that lunation, for sure. So curious, leave a comment below if that Mercury ruled new moon over the weekend brought some interesting conversations to the surface for you. All right, so for this week, we are going to be discussing and focusing on, of course, Mercury. What literal perfect timing, in fact. Mercury, again, in this chart is at 3 degrees of Libra, forming almost an exact conjunction to the moon, which will be exact later today. Mercury is ruled by 2 zodiac signs. In fact, it is ruled by Virgo as well as Gemini. Now, interesting, because Gemini is an air sign, and typically we often associate air signs with a lot of communication, a lot of talking, a lot of outreach, right? Those types of very obvious mercurial things. But Mercury is also associated with healing, and that's where Virgo comes in. Virgo is associated very much, it's an earth sign, and it's very much associated with like your physical health. It's often associated with nurses and doctors and caretakers. So, it is very interesting, because you have Gemini, which is just so conversational, and then you have Virgo, which is very much about the healing arts, and both of these have co-rulership within Mercury. So because Mercury is associated with these 2 zodiac signs, it is also associated with 2 houses in the astrological chart. It is associated with the 3rd house and the 6th house. So just to reinforce those archetypes, right? The 3rd house is your local community, your siblings. It is very much communication. And then you have the 6th house, which is your routines, sort of like your to-do list, your chore list, if you will, your doctor's appointments. It's a lot of what we consider mundane behavior, but all very necessary to kind of, keep the cogs turning, if you will. Virgo is also associated with the stomach, which is very interesting because you almost have sort of like a gut reaction, right? The digestive area in general is very Virgo ruled. But you know, when you think like your gut instincts or like the gut feelings, right? That is very much associated with Virgo, very mercurial. And then with Gemini is associated with, I believe, the hands. And, you know, when you think about what that means, right? Like even how some individuals communicate with their hands. I'm very talkative with my hands personally, but also those who, you know, speak sign languages. So, you know, kind of interesting when, again, you kind of break out those archetypes a little bit further. And if you want to learn more about the houses, I will also include a blog that has some descriptors for each to help you out in your educational journey of astrology. I love talking about Mercury because me personally, I also have a Libra Mercury. So the current placement of Mercury is slowly but surely forming towards a conjunction with my own natal Mercury. And I'm very excited because it's almost like a return, right? Again, conjunctions are all about new beginnings. And, you know, I'm excited to just refresh my mindset, to refresh my perspective. But, and here's the but, my friends, we are slowly but surely approaching Mercury retrograde. Mercury retrograde has to be one of the most popularized, mainstream, talked about, well-known of all the astrological happenings, right? Every time Mercury retrograde happens, we see people talking about, you know, contracts falling through, their internet connection is really whack. So it's kind of funny, you know, that communications in the modern times get so impacted when we experience Mercury retrograde. In fact, if you look into the Farmer's Almanac, Mercury retrogrades are even indicated to help farmers effectively plant their crops. And yes, you can find an ephemeris with all astrological ingressions in a Farmer's Almanac. But, you know, with Mercury slowly approaching that retrograde period, and again, this card is not a retrograde card, but it is worth mentioning because we are, again, very slowly but surely approaching that time. I believe Mercury retrograde will be hitting exactly forming into that time zone September 9th or September 10th. So I will be covering probably a little bit more of the astrological data in relation to that in the coming weeks. But just so you know, it's approaching. We are currently in what they consider a shadow period for Mercury retrograde. So if communications are starting to get fuzzy, if you are already starting to feel a little bit, you know, overwhelmed mentally, if you're just having a hard time nailing things down with people, do your best to get that stuff sorted now, because when Mercury retrograde actually hits, this is when we enter into a different sort of mindset. So Mercury, in true Virgo fashion, it loves to plan, it loves to prepare, it's very detail oriented. But when Mercury retrograde happens, it's almost like we put our editor cap on and we become an editor. We start to revisit, revise, take a second look back at things. And it's all about kind of being in revision mode during Mercury retrograde, which will take us through pretty much the entire month of September. Will be in a Mercury retrograde. They usually last about 3 weeks. So we're not going to be exiting that Mercury retrograde period until the first week of October. So September is not going to be the month for signing contracts. It's not going to be the month for, you know, solving the nitty-gritty problems. What it is going to be the month for is, like I said, going into revision mode. So if there are certain aspects of your life, particularly those that are ruled by Mercury, right? This would just be an excellent time to clean things up, clear things up. And this isn't necessarily a time for deleting things, right? I'm kind of thinking in my editing mode, right? But, you know, if you can find a better word to use, a better synonym, maybe take a second look, reevaluate your punctuation, so to speak. This is the best time to do that. And Mercury wants us to be detail oriented, but sometimes, you know, things just move so fast that little mistakes are made and things happen. And Mercury retrograde periods are just here to kind of remind us, like, hey, it's okay to like pause for a moment and to like check everything out and make sure that it's actually on point. That's what we'll need to be doing here. So again, we're slowly but surely approaching that. We do have another like 10 or 11 days before we really enter into that period. So I say use it. I say use it to your full degree. If there's anything that you need to be, working on, editing, reevaluating, if contracts are being negotiated, right? We are nearing the end of the year, kind of that Q3 period where these things start to happen, Q4, depending on how your businesses are ran. Just reevaluate, okay? Very mercurial energy there. So I'm going to read from my little handy dandy book for you all so we can talk a little bit more about Mercury. Okay. Mercury, the planet of intelligence and talking, is the closest planet to the sun and making it the fastest to move through the zodiac. Mercury suggests you should put effort behind your talk. The god Mercury is the Roman counterpart to the Greek god Hermes, the messenger with wings at his heels and on his hat, connected to everything associated with the mind. Quick wit, brevity, mental flights, trickery, inspiration, and also movement. Mercury gives poetry to the imagination, since the gods Mercury and Hermes are related to the Egyptian god Thoth, god of writing, patron of scribes, and those who work as divine mediators and interpreters. The god Mercury and his counterparts also have very much to do with magic and medicine. When it comes to the body, Mercury rules the eyes, brain, nerves, as well as fingers and toes. In ancient Greece, Hermes was the god of roads and transportation and was the son of Apollo, the sun god. This makes sense, Mercury being the closest planet to the sun. Mercury is also a comedian and can be a bit of a trickster. Just when everything's to be flowing one way, Mercury changes the direction. Literally just like a retrograde, right? We're moving forward, we're progressing, then all of a sudden we stop and we inch backwards. Mercury is spontaneous and insanely flexible. Mercury is the wisdom and the stupidity found in intelligence, when it is not connected to the heart or feelings, that is. Mercury maximizes imagination, but can also symbolize lies, double talk with mixed meanings. It's a planet of gaslighting, purposeful confusion. Mercury also shows how mentally sharp and flexible we are, our mental range and eloquency. Is that a word? Eloquence? Mercury tends to be chatty, superficial. It governs friendly relationships as well as the Freudian slip. When the Mercury card presents itself in a reading, it's time to use your mental faculties to get your point across. Words and how you use them are very significant. You may have to talk your way into or out of something. Whatever the reason, how you communicate through writing or through speaking is very important. Composition, writing, and editing may figure in. As I said, as we approach this Mercury retrograde period, we should all just put on our editor caps. Regarding romance and relationships, it could mean that a friendship is the best option for you now. The time has not yet ripened to enter into a relationship with a person. You may also attract partners who are non-emotional, highly rational, or objective. These lovers and friends may be offended by flip remarks or joking over serious matters. You may be also involved with someone who double talks, who's witty but not emotionally content or connected. This is also the card of brothers and sisters as well as twins. This could be a great time for observation, reasoning, taking things apart, putting them back together. Mercury also signifies travels, maps, and staying in motion. So if there's a trip or a vacation coming up for you, that could be indicated. Codes and forms of magic may also figure in. Mercury brings keen awareness to use your mind so you know how to fulfill your matters. And the tarot card associated with Mercury is the Magician, which I feel is so perfect because when you look at the Magician tarot card, you have all of the elements present. And Mercury is a really interesting planet for having that, co-rulership. There are some others like Venus, for example, who is Libra and Taurus. But, that dynamic energy between Gemini and Virgo and the mercurial aspects of our lives are certainly indicated this week. And again, with us very slowly approaching a Mercury retrograde, it makes a lot of sense. So this week, we are thinking, we are talking, we are preparing, we are healing. That new moon in Virgo that we just had, again, very mercurial, very healing. If there is some kind of conflict that needs to be worked out, that to be discussed, this is something that's hitting personally for me right now, then this is very supportive energy for that. So if you are in that type of position as well, then be brave and put your thinking cap on, my love, because now is the time to just figure some things out and get some things dealt with so that we don't have to continue carrying the burden of circumstances not being sorted out, or us not really knowing where we stand, what our feelings are. Sometimes I think we get so caught up in reactions and responses, we don't get the opportunity to process. And that is what really Mercury wants us to do, right? I was just thinking the other day about how in our news cycles, we're really good at hearing about things happening and hearing about things ending. But what about the middle part? What about processing? What about existing? What about living? What is happening in the middle? And that makes a lot of sense with why I pulled this card this week, because I'm in processing mode and maybe you are too. So that is all I have for you this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you are local to Dayton, Ohio, I will actually be taking some in-person readings this Virgo season. On September 18th, I will be at the Well in Kettering, and I have 3 appointments available at this time. So if you are interested in picking up one of those readings, I would love to talk with you. If you are not local to Dayton, though, my books are also open for virtual digital readings over Zoom, and I would be more than happy to make some time in my schedule to speak with you that way as well. So, stay mercurial, my friends. Stay curious, and I will talk to you next week. Bye!